Here's the process that's often pitched to language learners about how they should go about learning words. Step 1, take an unknown word. Step 2, learn the answer to what does this word mean. Step 3, drill that answer until recall becomes automatic. Step 4, practice recognizing that word through listening practice. This is generally how we're told that we can make words automatic. We take some representation of a word, we drill it until we can recall it fast, then we listen to the language to reinforce or cement that word in our brain. And that's supposedly equivalent to a native-like understanding of the word. But I think this gets the process entirely backwards. In this video, I'm going to show you why I think we fundamentally misunderstand what we're trying to do when we're listening to a language, and how that misunderstanding comes from how we think about learning words in the first place. The classical model starts with a kind of naivety about what a word actually is. We experience the meaning of a word as if it was one thing. When I say the word wedding, it doesn't feel like your brain is accessing thousands of different pieces of stored information. It just feels like you know what wedding means. Wedding feels like one stable thing. Meaning feels atomic. And because meaning feels atomic, well, we assume that it must be represented atomically. Maybe that representation is a definition. Maybe it's a translation. Maybe it's an image that represents the word. But whatever we choose, the assumption is the same. That there exists some representation we can point to and say, that's what this word means. Or more technically, this definition, this translation, or this image is approximately equal to the answer to the question, what does this word mean? And once we make that assumption, the rest of the classical model of how to learn a word follows naturally. If I can approximately represent the meaning of a word, then learning the word is simply a matter of getting that representation into my unconscious mind. I learn it consciously, I drill it until it becomes automatic, and then I practice recognizing it when I hear the language. And this is how we get the idea of listening practice. If we assume the meaning of the word is something conscious that we already drilled into our head, then listening to the language isn't where we learn what the word means. It's primarily where we get faster at spotting words we already know in real time. It's called listening practice as opposed to just listening, because you're really not listening to the language like you would your native language. You put on the language and you go on a kind of safari hunt where every word you catch is a point and every word that goes past you is a miss. Every step of the model follows from the assumption that a word can be approximated by one representation, and nobody ever stops to check, hold on. Is that actually true? Take the word wedding again. You can make a flashcard for it. On the front, we'd put wedding, and on the back, we'd put its definition, a ceremony where two people get married. Most traditional language learners would say, yes, that's basically representative of the meaning of the word. Wedding equals a ceremony where two people get married. But now answer a few questions. Where is a wedding usually held? Do the two people getting married usually want to do it? What does the bride usually wear? Is a wedding usually planned in advance? Is a wedding a major or minor event in a person's life? The definition of wedding has nothing to say about these, which is odd because they seem like fundamental questions about what weddings actually are. If you ask a native speaker what a wedding is, you're very unlikely to only get the response, a ceremony in which two people get married. They're likely to add love, families, cakes, big white dresses, flowers, etc. And this matters because when native speakers use words like wedding, well, they bake in all of that meaning beyond the definition. You could hear somebody say, I went to the wedding and the cake was great. But that only makes sense if you know that there are usually cakes at weddings. Otherwise, it's a complete non sequitur. Like if I said, I went scuba diving and the cake was great. And this isn't some isolated example. We rely on this extra encoded information constantly to automatically understand messages and context. To automatically understand nobody danced at the wedding requires you to know that dancing commonly happens at weddings. To automatically understand they had to cancel the wedding requires you to know that weddings are planned in advance. To automatically understand she wasn't invited to the wedding requires you to know that weddings typically have a defined group of guests. If you notice a pattern with these examples, it's all incidental information. None of it belongs to the central core of what a wedding is. Weddings don't need cake to be a wedding. They don't need to be in any particular place. And there doesn't need to be any family present. Yet all of this information seems to be encoded into the word regardless. Our brain doesn't seem to draw this distinction between essential core information and incidental information. A native-like understanding doesn't seem to be approximately equal to some core feature of a wedding. It seems to contain a bunch of incidental information about what weddings usually are. Or in other words, the way we consciously experience wedding doesn't seem to be as a singular packet of meaning. It seems more like a container with a bunch of questions that nobody's ever directly asked us or taught us. So here's the key reframe. frame. Instead of thinking of a word's definition as some special characteristic of a word, we should instead think of it as simply an answer to a question about a word. It's the answer to the question, what essential feature do all this word's uses share? A word's definition is no different than any of these other questions. It's simply one answer among many. A more accurate version of this flashcard wouldn't be wedding equals a ceremony in which two people get married. It would be what essential feature do all weddings share equals a ceremony in which two people get married. That's a much more honest way to look at what the flashcard is actually solving. We could drill a different question, like what is the general emotional atmosphere of a wedding, and put joyful and celebratory on the other side. And for a sentence like, they were so sad that the wedding had ended, that answer is actually more helpful at understanding the message of that sentence than the answer to the definition question was. Once you see it this way, then treating the definition as if it somehow represents the word begins to look arbitrary. It's one question out of many, and it's easy to find sentences where the definition just doesn't help us understand the message of the sentence. Translations have a similar problem. They answer the question, what word in another language most closely responds to this word? An image, same problem. It's simply another answer to a single question, what image best represents this word? No single representation seems to capture all the questions that a native speaker unconsciously carries about a wedding. And if that's true, the entire classical model starts to break down. Remember that the whole point of drilling is to take something we consciously know and make it unconscious. We start with some conscious representation of wedding and we drill it until we don't have to think about it anymore. But what does it say if the answer to the question, what does this word mean, actually can't be consciously represented? It would seem to suggest that it's impossible to give your mind an approximate unconscious understanding of a word simply by drilling it. You can clearly make conscious knowledge about the word easier to access, obviously, but that's simply not equivalent to making the meaning of the word unconscious. And I know that distinction on its face seems arbitrary, but it's really not. I'm going to give a thought experiment that demonstrates this, but before I do, let me just give you a metaphor so you kind of understand what I'm saying. Let's say you're going to hike a mountain and you don't want to get lost. Studying a map of the mountain would obviously help you traverse the terrain, but that knowledge shouldn't be confused with that unconscious sense of spatial awareness that we get after thoroughly exploring a place. That's an actual difference we can feel between conscious and unconscious understanding of a terrain. And that's the best metaphor I could come up with to help you have an intuitive sense of why this even matters, why this isn't just like semantic. And that's what we're gonna get into now. We're gonna start collapsing this abstraction. And what's going to become clear is flashcards and vocab lists are trying to make the wrong kind of thing unconscious. We're not being creative enough about how we view unconscious information storage. Again, we have this implicit assumption that what our brain stores when it stores a word is like one thing, one file in a cabinet. We never stop to ask, what if there's not one single thing our brain stores when we learn a word? What if trying to feed our mind one thing, one representation, over and over and over again is like trying to put the square peg in the circle hole? What I want to do now is show you that we don't have to speculate about this. I want to show you that the language knowledge we store in our unconscious mind has certain properties that can't be explained if words are stored as little bits of meaning. We're going to start by showing a sentence with one missing word. What I want you to do is actively try not to understand this as you listen. Try as hard as you can to not understand the following sentence. He put toothpaste on the brush and started brushing his... The reason I said don't try to understand is because I want to avoid you using conscious reasoning. Because the fact that you still predict that last word without thinking shows something about how the brain stores words. It seems like your brain can access words as unconscious answers to context-encoded questions. When we hear a sentence with a missing final word, the context of that sentence encodes a question that our brain unconsciously answers. This sentence, he put toothpaste on the brush and started brushing his, encodes the question, what do you brush with a toothbrush? And our brain seems to provide a set of answers automatically, unconsciously. And that set has one heavily weighted member, so our brain unconsciously produces teeth at the end of the sentence. Now, you might not be impressed with that, so let's go to the next example. Again, try not to understand the sentence as you listen. After a long day at work, she collapsed onto the... The context encodes a question, where do you collapse after work? And I would assume for about half the audience, bed got pulled, and for the other half, couch got pulled. And I think if you reread the sentence, you can probably feel your mind going either way. Our mind, again, provided us with the set of places you collapse after work unconsciously. This is very weird. Your brain clearly doesn't store bed and couch like two separate isolated atoms. It seems to be able to natively represent words as members of answer sets. Do you see how odd that is? We encoded the question, where do you collapse after work? And your brain unconsciously responded as if it already had the answer to this question. It's not like I need to ask you, where do people usually collapse after a long day of work? And just wait for you to consciously reason about the answer. I can pull the answer from you unconsciously by feeding you a context-encoded question. And I'm gonna give you 5 more examples of this. He couldn't sleep, so he started counting. Context-encoded question, what do you count when you can't sleep? Answer, sheep. He took a sip of coffee and burned his. Context-encoded question, what gets burned by hot coffee? Answer, tongue. She knocked on the door and waited for someone to. Context-encoded question, what does a person do after you knock? Answer, answer. She was running late, so she sprinted to catch the. Context-encoded question, what do you run to catch when you're late? Answer, bus. The waiter cleared the plates and brought the. Context-encoded question, what does a waiter bring after clearing plates? Answer, the check. And we shouldn't think that these sets only ever contain 1 or 2 words. It's just that sufficiently small enough sets make this process very obvious. This is a clear demonstration that the architecture of our unconscious mind is arranged in such a way that words can be represented as members of an effectively limitless number of overlapping sets. Our brains don't store words like we think they do. We think we see a picture of a tree, we hear the word tree, and our brain just stores a tree image somewhere. But this simply isn't what our unconscious mind is doing. Tree is in the set of things that grow. It's in the set of things made of wood. It's in the set of things you climb. It's in the set of things that give shade. It's in the set of things birds live in. It's in the set of things that can fall in your house. It's in the set of things you carve your initials into. Some of those sets don't even have names. There is no English word for things you carve your initials into. But yet you still know unconsciously that a tree is in it and a refrigerator isn't. So my diagram that shows words being more like answers to a set of questions isn't just a good conscious reframe. It's a more accurate representation of how the brain stores words compared to the classical model. A word doesn't exist in any one representation. Its meaning emerges from the relationships it participates in. So asking which representation is the meaning of the word is like asking which star in the Big Dipper is the constellation. There is no one star that represents the entire constellation. The constellation is fundamentally relational. And the question we should be asking is how our brain could possibly generate unconscious answers to what seems like an effectively limitless number of context-encoded questions at the scale it seems to be able to do. Why should we be able to hand our brain a set membership question and immediately get a correct unconscious response? None of us have ever drilled set membership of words. You might not have even heard the term set membership until this video. Yet all of us have this unconscious, robust ability to access words as answers to set membership questions. And here's where I'd like to introduce the input-based model on how we learn words. Step 1, take an unknown word. Step 2, encounter that word inside messages you understand. Step 3, let each encounter build unconscious relationships involving that word. Step 4, through enough encounters, those relationships become rich enough that you understand the word automatically. An acquisition of a word doesn't just mean you can recall it fast. It means you get that kind of spatial awareness I was talking about when I made the mountain metaphor. You get a deep, native-like feel for the word. The counter-argument I always hear when I make this point is, okay, fine, but a native-like feel for the word isn't necessary to produce it, and I agree. You can produce a word without having a native-like understanding of it, obviously. Just like you can memorize and recite a text without having a deep understanding of that text. But the kind of natural, authentic production and understanding that we experience in our native language has to come from this deep, native-like understanding of a word. So listening in the input-based model isn't about trying to impose a drilled atomic meaning into every single word we see. Instead of imposing our understanding onto what we hear, we use what we hear to build our understanding. It's not listening practice, it's just listening. We don't presume to start with the answer to the question, what does this word mean, and then drill that answer until it becomes unconscious. The answer to what does this word mean is emergent from the intersection of all the unconscious sets that include the word. Let's take a sentence we could meet in input input, like everybody who came to the wedding loved the cake but hated the music. With this one sentence, we can show that your brain could potentially generate an effectively limitless number of answers to set membership questions. To name a few, wedding is in the set of events people come to. Wedding is in the set of events people gather in one place for. Wedding is in the set of events attended by multiple people. Wedding is in the set of events where people eat cake. Wedding is in the set of events where people listen to music. Wedding is in the set of events people form opinions about. And as I've shown in other videos, this process doesn't require any definition matching. You don't need to presume that just because you couldn't define a word, that you didn't get anything out of the encounter. Each encounter can simply give your brain another piece of information about where that word belongs, another set it could be a member of. I would suggest that the only language learning method even theoretically capable of providing this kind of relational information at scale is consuming a massive amount of comprehensible input. Because listening to the language at a level we understand is the only place that our brain could possibly encounter enough information to build answers to all these set membership questions in an efficient amount of time. There simply is no conscious study method capable of transferring the sheer amount of information required to build all these relationships. This is why I constantly refer to comprehensible input as a fire hose of implicit information. Every conscious study method is bounded by the relatively low bandwidth of the conscious mind. More specifically, it's bounded by this incessant need to feel like we've learned something. So when you drill a definition, a translation, or an image, you aren't drilling the word's meaning. You're drilling one answer to one question out of the effectively limitless number of questions your brain has to unconsciously answer before it achieves a native-like understanding of that word. And as a disclaimer, this does not mean that input-based learners cannot look up words, or can't translate words, or can't get explanations. It's to say that no input-based learner should confuse those descriptions with the raw material it takes to build a native-like understanding. The way we should look at flashcards and vocab is a functional starting point for engaging with input, as opposed to representations of a word that we can drill until native-like fluency. If you missed my last theory video, I'm going to put it on the screen right here. I think the unconscious set framing in this video makes the argument in that video even more interesting. I will see you there.